I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today is Friday, and as you know, every Friday it's the Healing Circle. I'm pleased to be in partnership with my colleague, my friend, my leader, Dr. Bravada Garrett Akansanya, who leads the African American Child Wellness Institute and Braken's Psychological Consulting Services. Also with Dr. Oliver Williams, noted leader in the field of social work and in the area of domestic violence as well. We've got a special guest today, a great topic. We made reference to it yesterday in my conversation with Senator Bobby Joe Champion, I think Wednesday. It's an important conversation about trafficking, partner violence, about murdered and missing women here in Minnesota. What are we doing about that? And so we'll get into that in a second. Before I begin, I want to once again invite you all to support this program. Let's see. Did I lose myself here? Hold on.
Looks like we're on the show, and Brother Al is coming back. There he is.
I hit the wrong button and disappeared, but I guess that's called magic, right? A disappearing act. Well, listen, what I was saying was that I want you who are viewing and listening from wherever you are to support this by becoming a subscriber on our YouTube channel. Go to YouTube /Insight News MN and click the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything, but it keeps you connected. You get notices about when we're going live, and we want you to tell your friends. So like and share the program. We're streaming the program across several platforms with our association with the Black Press of America, the National Newspaper Publishers Association, across two of their platforms and across our own platforms on Facebook and also on Twitter and LinkedIn. So no matter which channel you arrive through, we appreciate you. We thank you. I want you to continue. We want you to be involved in the conversation. And you can do that by just dropping a chat in the conversation, in the comment section. If you want to get on the program live, say that in your comment, and we'll figure out how to connect and bring you into the conversation live. We'll send you a link. Beyond that, we have a special protocol that we use for the Friday program. We call this program the Healing Circle. It's healing indeed. And for that, with that, let me invite my sister, Dr. Bravada Garrett Akansanya, to bring the protocol forward, and we'll begin the program. Dr.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brother Baba Al. I'm happy to be here today and with our exceptional guest who will be explaining to us some of the things that we need to know in terms of being healthier as communities and how to bring peace about as opposed to violence. So I'm really excited about it. It's also our last Friday was, we weren't here because of the holiday. So we're going to talk a little bit about COVID as well as we go into what we call the recovery room at the end of the program. And one of the key things about it is that as we generate feelings and thoughts in reaction to this difficult topic we're handling today, we want to invite people to come and just have a conversation, like a town hall / support group that we go to right after this conversation. So the link will be put up closer toward the end, and we will get this done, and hopefully you'll join us today. The protocol that Baba Al is referring to is one of Afrocentric mental health, Afrocentric community. How in our homeland, in our motherland, we created ways of communicating that were sacred and respectful. So we start with a circle, because when we are in a circle, there is no beginning or end, no top or bottom. Everyone has equal access to voice and to share that voice in the center of the circle. We have access to that power that comes with voice, because in the circle, no matter who you are, you belong. In the circle, we honor our elders because those are the shoulders that we stand on. They worked our way and prayed our way into existence. And we honor our elders as well as our ancestors. And we honor them because those are the shoulders the elders stood on. And the ancestors are honored because they're closest to the Creator. So today we also engage in an orderly conversation where we share a virtual talking stick. So the stick is passed from one person to the next. You can ask for the stick, or it will just come to you routinely in the circle. And in that, when you get the stick, there's usually something, a burning question or something very important that spirit tells you you need to say or hear or do. And we continue to heal when we are in this place, this sacred time called the Healing Circle. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And I pass the talking stick to Baba Al McFarlane.
Well, thank you again. Well, let me introduce our guest today, and maybe Dr. Oliver Williams, between you and me and Dr. B, we can engage around this very, very important topic. Our guest is Artika Roller. She's a native of St. Paul's Rondo community. She's got 20 years of experience providing services for victims and survivors in the fields of intimate partner violence, in the field of sex trafficking and sexual violence. She earned her master's of social work degree from the University of Minnesota with a concentration in organizational leadership, advocacy, and public policy and system change. In addition, she's a graduate of the Alliance for Children and Families Executive Leadership Institute at the University of Michigan Ann Arbor Schools and of Business and Social Work. And throughout her career, she's received recognition for her work. Most recently, she was honored to accept the University of Minnesota School of Social Work Alum of the Year Award. She serves on several nonprofit boards, multidisciplinary advisory committees, and professional associations that focus on creating opportunities and eliminating system barriers for victims and services. Sister Artika, welcome and good to see you. Let me pass the talking stick over to Dr. Oliver to add to the introduction and to set the intention for today's conversation.
Well, thank you, Brother Al. What I want to say about Artika is the fact that she's a person that's done some really important work in terms of addressing the issue of not only gender-based violence, that she's going to explain to you what that means. Because sometimes in different places it has different contexts. And so she's going to explain that. But in addition, for her and her work in dealing with sexual assault, and both sets of things are important in the discussion. When I talk to Artika, one of the things that I realized in our conversation is that they are seamless in the way that she thinks about the work and she does the work. So with that, Artika, can you sort of talk to us about what is gender-based violence? How do you define it? And how do you define sexual assault in the context of gender-based violence?
Well, first, I want to say it is an honor and a privilege to be at this table with three icons from the community in Minnesota. I feel blessed and humbled. And so, thank you for the invitation to be here and to have this important discussion with you. Dr. B and Dr. Oliver has been instrumental in the work that I do. I have been trained by both of them on different occasions. And then Mr. McFarlane, you need no introductory to the community and the wonderful work that you've been doing. So thank you so much. So gender-based violence really is violence that is directed, what we would say, at women, and it disproportionately affects women. And the United Nations, that's how they identify it. But in our community, it could also be violence that is really focused at someone who is transgender that considers themselves women as well. Someone from the LGBTQ community could also be experience violence. But sexual violence, domestic violence, and sex trafficking are really at the root of gender-based violence. Now, although all three of those are different forms of victimization, their harms are interconnected through violence. You could be someone who is experiencing intimate partner violence. Your partner could be very violent, and you also could be sexually assaulted by that partner. So they can happen individually, and then they can also happen within the same relationship or experience of violence. So that would include rape, sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking, harassment, trafficking, sexual exploitation. But we have things like honor killings, female genitalia mutilation, murder, forced marriage, gang rape and violence as well. So there's a broad scope of what encompasses gender-based violence and the experiences that people have.
Thank you, Artika. One of the questions that I have, given what you described, what are the challenges of us addressing this issue within the African American community? And let me give you an example. When I was directing the institute that I had, one of the things that we attempted to do is to have conversations with other civil rights organizations. So there have been times when I've reached out to two different groups, and we came together to have the conversation. And they're busy functioning and dealing with things that are important to our community. But this is important to our community too. Why do you think it's a challenge to have conversations around domestic violence and sexual assault within our community?
I think that there's multiple challenges within our community and outside of our community. I think violence and rape of Black women have been normalized through the history of this country. And so Black women continue to be considered less victims. They're not perfect victims. And sometimes Black women are also held responsible for their own victimization. Like, what did you do? How did you show up? If you wouldn't have behaved that way, these things wouldn't have happened to you. So I think that that's one reason. I also think that there's an other overarching thought around racism, and that is what Black folks should be concentrating on, the anti-racism, anti-oppression movement. So anything outside of that would be secondary. We don't have the capacity to deal with complex situations or more than one at a time. And I would say that that's not true. Black folks have dealt with and led through many complex situations, and we can do more. We can chew gum and walk at the same time. And we have proven that over and over again. Right. So I think that there's some myths around what we can do and what we can't do. And we have to change that narrative and the conversation about what we should be doing. Violence within our community is interconnected. And this is connected with police violence, with community gun violence as well, and gender-based violence. They're all connected. And I think that these are all things that we'll have to take a different look at and create our own strategies and narratives around how we want to message and talk about these things and solutions towards healing.
I'm curious about this issue about healing. So we developed something called the 5 stages of healing when we talk about victims of domestic violence and and that it's important for people who've been victimized to know that there is healing associated with it. If they with that, if you go to will2change.org, that's will the digit 2 change.org, you'll see something that talks about healing and some examples about how we've tried to think about it and approach it, but to hear it also from people who've been victimized. So I'm curious, Artika, when you say that there's ways that we can heal, what are some examples that you can come up with in terms of the healing process?
Right. So I think through the healing process, when we're talking about violence and gender-based violence specifically, um, one of the things that we see within this movement is that there is a lack of culturally appropriate services and healing modalities. And I thank Dr. B for bringing in one of the process, a healing circle with a talking stick, being in community and with others that have liked and same and similar experiences. So that's one way that people heal. I mean, individual safety plans as well is another way to heal, and developing your own self-care plan as well, your self-care plan around healing. But as our organization, I think that one of the things that we need to do is implement better coordination of services for individuals as well. There's a lot of barriers in receiving and accessing services. And so, as an organization, really doing a better job of coordination. I think the other way is better implementing pathways to emergency and long-term healing. So there might be healing that needs to happen at a crisis level, and that might be just immediately getting out of that situation.
Mm-hmm.
And then what is the long-term strategies around healing as well? And healing is individual, and there's no end goal. Like healing is an ongoing process. And
Right.
so you might get to one phase and feel like I'm okay, and then identify, and then there's more things that I need to do. So I want people to think about healing in a way that there's no end, that it is ongoing process.
Yeah, that's very great. You mentioned something about a healing plan. I
Yeah.
also think about escape plan, but can you talk about the differences between the two things?
Yeah, so a healing plan is that you have already dealt with the immediate concern, the safety plan. So we do safety planning with folks. And we know that people that are leaving abusive situations are more likely at that point in time to be hurt, harmed, or killed.
Mm-hmm.
And so there needs to be safety around that. So an advocate will walk through what is that safety plan? Where do you go? Who are you going to be with? Where do you leave documentation? Very detailed and technical response to get safety. So when you talk about the escape plan, the safety plan, that's one plan. Once you are safe, and you are really trying to look like, where are my next steps? How do I heal from the process? That's a different strategy. That's a different plan. And there also needs to be safety for the people that are doing the work as well. So I would call that ethical self-care or ethical safety planning. I need to be well enough to do this work um, with you. And so that's the difference between immediate escape safety planning and then a long-term strategy around healing and wellness.
What's the prevalence of violence in the community?
Right. So unfortunately, we are seeing some uptick in violence. Um, Dr. B mentioned COVID, and we did see some uptick in violence because people that were doing harm or abusers were at home. They were not out and about in community, and it elevated the rates of violence that we were seeing. In addition to elevating the rates of violence that we were seeing, the cases were more complex and more severe during COVID as well. So in 2012, around human trafficking, the Department of Justice reported that 62% of all US human trafficking victims, including children and adults, were African American.
Mm.
So that dispels the myth, excuse me, that these human traffic victims are international victims. They're people that are not born in the US. What the Justice Department is saying, no, these are people that were born in the US, and not only people born in the US, 62% come from the African American community. In addition to that, 52% of juvenile prostitution arrests were of African American children. Now, in Minnesota, we worked hard. We do not arrest children for prostitution. The average age of someone entering prostitution as a teen or a young person or a child is 12 years old. So in Minnesota, we have something that's called the Safe Harbor Law that states that children that are minors that have were trafficked are children in need of services. We no longer charge them with the crime of prostitution. I never met a 12-year-old that had the capacity to exploit themselves or prostitute themselves.
Yeah. And have you seen the video, Very Young Girls?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, so that's a very powerful video. We get a chance to, I got a chance to sort of sit with the Department of Justice to view the film, and also to spend some time with the people who were the prosecutors in the video, in the video, and also some people that were doing some work in DC when they showed you the work that they were doing with pimps to try to harass the women who were in DC. And so so a very powerful film. But one of the things that was interesting to me was there was a situation where there was a young woman in dealing with the court case, and she was adolescent, and they were going after her. And but what was interesting to me that they weren't going after the pimps in the same way.
You know, one of the things that we have seen, and there has been some good reports out regarding this, is that the adultification of Black girls, in that they are just not seen as victims. And when they, did the research, they were asking simple questions. When they looked at a young Black girl around the age of 8 years old, they were saying things like, she doesn't need protection, she can take care of herself. But when it was a white child around the same years old, she was deemed as someone that needed protection, didn't have the ability to make choices.
Right.
And so the adultification of young women is where we see victims actually being charged with crimes that were resulting or results from their exploitation, their abuse, and their trafficking. And and the leading cause of death for African American women from the ages of 15, which is still a child, to the ages of 45 is intimate partner homicide.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk more with you about those things, but one of the things that I want to do before we move on to other things that you can enlighten us about is your move from working around sexual assault to another organization. Can you talk to us about the new organization that you're working with and what your work is there?
Well, thank you. And I'll give a little bit of history. I started off my work in this movement in the anti-sex trafficking world, and then moved into doing some work at Women's Advocates in St. Paul, the first domestic violence shelter in the United States. And so doing some work around intimate partner and domestic violence, and then ended up doing some statewide work with the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And so doing a lot of policy advocacy training work through there. But I recently moved to Cornerstone Advocacy Services, and just a good fit for my skills and my experience, because we have work that we're doing around sex trafficking, primary focus around intimate partner violence, but we have some work around general crimes, and trying to expand that work. And then in addition, work around sexual violence. So it took all of my background and put it in one organization, and really happy to be here, because this is the place where folks can get comprehensive long-term care. So we can support when the crisis happens immediately. If a person chooses to have a criminal justice response, we can work through that as well. Immediate shelter and long-term shelter, and all things in between for families that need support.
Very good. So, can you help us understand, why do people stay in relationships when they're being victimized?
There's many reasons why people stay. And some of the things that I have heard throughout my career is that they feel responsible for their family and their children. They don't know where they can go. There's a lack of resources as well. Um, I had one victim tell me that if I don't stay here with him, we've been together since we were teenagers. I think something's bad's going to happen to that person.
Mm.
So I'm going to stay in this relationship that's the father of my children, because I need to take care of them. In some communities, there is this culture around the man has the right, or your partner has a right to set you straight, and he's the head of the household. There's religious reasons why people stay in relationships. So there's not just one reason. It is complicated why people stay, and it's hard for sometimes to disconnect. And I don't want to say take this lightly, but there's an element that this person could be in love with that person, and that is true, and that's real. And so we meet people where they're at and work through that process with them.
Yeah. And
Can I jump in? I just have to say something.
Let me make this one point.
Okay. You might be taking my words, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. No, I was going to talk about religious misinterpretation.
Yes.
Okay, you can do that, but I'm going to go back to her about people staying with the.
Well, I'll come back to it later. Go ahead, brother.
Okay. So what got me excited when you just talked about why women stay, because they think they are in love, and they're in love with the idea of being in love.
Yes.
And they remember the good times and not the bad times, and they don't see that the bad times actually outweigh it. But I want to circle it around and just pick up again on what you were saying about the children, because I hear, at least from the research I've read, that a lot of times women won't even leave until their kids start getting abused. Then they will leave or try to leave. So tell me what you know about that.
No,
Please.
and I definitely have seen that. I've seen women stay. Also, we have to talk about our shelter system, because sometimes our shelter system doesn't allow young men over the age of 15. And so are you going to leave your child with your abuser, or do you be homeless? And so there might be a limited options around that. So that's something that impacts why people stay, is their children. But the other thing that I have seen is that not only I have seen healing because they want better for their children. So sometimes women make tough decisions about leaving, because they want better for their children as well. I've seen women go through recovery because they wanted to have their children back in their lives. So children has been one of the main reasons why I've seen women make really hard decisions about leaving an abuser.
Yeah, I've seen that too, Artika, where sometimes it's the children's observations that may motivate the victim to leave. I've seen that not only with a female partner, but with grandparents who are victimized
Yeah.
by the intimate, by their partner, and a discussion with their children and their children's children uh, motivate them to start to think differently about it and move. So very good comments about that. So,
And now that you mentioned that, I think that we also want to talk about that. Um, we see a spectrum of ages. So it's not always young folks.
right.
We see older people that are in violent relationships as well.
Hmm.
And there's not a social economic element to it either. Um, we have seen, recently high profile cases of a person being in a very violent relationship for many years. And so there is a perception that it may be people that are uneducated or poor,
Right.
but those things are not true.
That's right. That's right. I I'm thinking of a case when, as you mentioned that, Artika, where there was a man that was coming out of prison, but he was dating a victim. The victim was a psychiatrist, and as they were having conversations about that, the ways that one thinks about those things or how you can navigate that is challenging. I've seen people who've been prosecutors who were victims of abuse. And so I agree with you. Sometimes you can't tell what directions things are coming from. But Al, you had a comment that you wanted to make?
I'm just fascinated with the conversation. So I'm sitting here as a student listening to the experts, and I thank you all. It's a difficult topic, but obviously lots of things come to mind. When you talked about you have cases of a psychiatrist or even a prosecutor who ends up being a victim, my question is, how does that happen? Because you think that the training, the knowledge, the skill positions an individual to protect himself or herself from the things that he or she is observing and attempting to resolve to the good or the protection of society and of community. So the question is, how? That's question one. How does it happen that even those of us that are quote unquote educated, trained, knowledgeable, can find ourselves victimized in a relationship? How does it happen?
Yeah, so it's a grooming process. It doesn't happen immediately. You don't get into a relationship like this and right away. So there is a whole grooming process that I have heard that people have explained it took years for them to get to the point where physical violence was actually happening in the relationship. So it's a slow process of isolating people from loved ones and support network.
Yep.
There's something that we call gaslighting. And in our community, you're trying to make me think I'm crazy, and so gaslighting is one of the methods as well. And then once it's kind of that slow process, or we talk about the frog, the water warms up slow enough that you don't realize that the pot is boiling until it's too late.
That's right.
You are already there, and you have been groomed in such a way that now you don't realize that um, there's an opportunity to get out, or what that opportunity is for you to get out. You are really so stressed out that you are not thinking from your capacity to make intellectual decisions as you are in these high profile careers. You are making decisions based on your reaction and safety. And so it may be if there is a threat, someone had explained to me that he didn't start out threatening me with a gun. He just kind of let me know that I had a gun. He had a gun. Then he wanted to carry it everywhere. Then it would end up on the table when we were arguing, to the point then it was being pulled out and aimed at my head.
Right. Yeah.
And can I just jump in too right quick, because I think even the word grooming talks about a degree of intentionality.
Yes.
And I think it happens intentionally in many cases, but in some cases, it is a replication of what they've learned about what a man is supposed to do.
Mhm.
And I've seen it so incremental, like Sister Artika said, it's so incremental that next thing the woman looks up or the partner looks up and they are a victim. And it's kind of duplicated on a larger social cultural level. And we call that mental side, right? When mentally you dehumanize another person so that you can treat them as being less than human or less than you. So that mental psychological process of making you an object, objectifying you, creates a way for people to excuse themselves psychologically and spiritually for hurting you, because you're less than them. And so I think what I'm hearing when I listen to Sister Artika talking about the gradual grooming process is that they start out sweet as pie, and then next thing you know they're not sweet, and it comes like, I can't show her my real self. I can't show her so it's that honeymoon. Oh, you so lovely, everything's so nice, and then you get trapped like in a spider's web and you can't get out. So I like the fact that we're talking about this, because a lot of women, especially women that I've worked with in counseling and their children, they've witnessed it. And it's while you're in it, you don't even know the insanity of the experience. It just gradually becomes normalized. So I think that's what I'm hearing my sister teach us, is that we have to be aware that, one, we're human. We have to remind our sisters, our brothers, our children that they have a right to humanity, to the right to power, a right to be well, that love doesn't hurt like that. And when we see sisters doing work like she's doing, she legitimizes the right for them to seek help. It's not just a one person. You're saying by being in that organization, we are here. We're here because it's more than just you.
Right.
It's happening a lot, and you deserve to get help. So I really am excited to hear you about this new position. I'm excited to hear about the work we're doing in helping our community realize, as Black people, we don't have to be victimized. As women, we don't have to be victimized. As children watching our parents, we don't have to do it that way. And that's what makes it difficult, is because they learn it over time and it fulfills a function. So what do you think about that, Sister Artika? Do you think that role of grooming fulfills a function, or that hatefulness fulfills a function?
I do think that it fulfills a function, but I do also think that, at times it's a trauma response. And so I've experienced or witnessed or have been through so much trauma that I don't have the emotional wherewithal and the support systems to help me funnel that in a positive way. And it's coming out sideways on someone that I could definitely love and care about. But this is all I know on how to communicate my feelings and my frustrations.
Thank you.
Anybody remember reading, this reminds me of Richard Wright, Native Son?
Yes.
Read that book, and I think there's a scene in that book, if I'm remembering the right book, where in the South, the protagonist, or the story includes a scene where a rural sharecropper type family, and I'm trying to remember, it's years ago, but the picture in my mind is where a family lived in one room, probably slept on one pallet, and where the father and the mother and the children were all in one bed, so to speak, together. And if I remember correctly, the story was that the mom woke up and discovered the man molesting the child and grabbed either an axe or a pan and tried to kill him or hurt him or whatever. But that was her reaction to the violation. Am I remembering the story correctly, or am I making that up? Does anybody remember that, reading
You're
that?
mute. Bravada, you're on mute.
Definitely the story, that line of reasoning in that story was about the discovery. And I think that's the piece that it's kind of standing out. And yes, that was in the book. That is in there. And about the discovery and how we can be asleep, right? Instead of woke.
Mhm.
Right. And I'll take it back to kind of my first comments, is that, the violence and rape of Black women have been normalized through our history. And that this can, and Black women continue to be considered less than perfect victims. And this is not a victimization. And so all of those things play into why, how, and again, why people stay in those relationships.
Well, with that too, Artika, I wanted to see whether you had any advice about how to help victims of abuse. What is it that we could do? One thing I think of is the how perpetrators of violence, sexual assault, or intimate partner violence will try to isolate the victim. And so, you have any advice about how we can be helpful?
Yes, I definitely have some advice about how we can be helpful. And really, again, it goes back to the barriers for folks, for seeking services. So there's a lack of trust of dominant systems of healing modalities, again, being responsible for others, feeling the need to keep the family together, lack of cultural responsive services, and then we can't meet the needs of those families. And so I bring those up again because what can we do as a community? And that is that you need to develop trust and listen. You might be the first person that person has told. And so not giving ultimatums is one thing, like you need to leave or less there's nothing I can do for you. But letting that person know, as Dr. Bravado had said, you deserve to be loved. I understand that this is hard, but there are things and there are ways to get help. Um, you deserve better. But really not showing up in a way where you again are trying to control and tell that person, if I was you, this is what I would do. There ain't no way that I would let this happen. That's not helpful in that moment. So being that ear, listening, reasoning, helping people develop safety plans, because there is many reasons why people are unable or can't seek help. What we can do as organizations, there are many things that we can definitely do as organizations. Again, making access feasible for folks, culturally relevant and responsive services, advocating for folks within criminal justice system, and then access to housing and safety is one of the biggest barriers that we see for individuals as well.
Let's take a break and we'll come back and continue this conversation. I'm Al McFarlane. This is the Conversation with Al McFarlane. Today is Friday. It's the Healing Circle. We'll be right back. Are you or someone you know recovering financially from the COVID-19 pandemic, the lockdown, or any other reason? If so, help is available. Findhelp.org is a site to find a wide range of resources, including food, medical care, and more. The best part is based on your zip code. Visit findhelp.org, enter your zip code and the service you need. You'll get a map directing you to the organizations that can help you. Help is waiting at findhelp.org. If you need help starting anew, findhelp.org is the site for you. Well, that's the information that ties into our conversation today. We're talking with the new leader of Minnesota's Office of Murdered and Missing African American Women. Artika Rolla is here. Artika, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the work. I wanted to ask you the specifics of services you provide. Are your services on the policy level? Are they on the public information general level? Are they specific services to specific individuals, women in particular, and families? And is there a hyper focus on, for example, the name missing, murdered and missing? Is this an investigatory resource that tries to find people that are missing and may have been or may be murdered? Can you explain?
Oh, I definitely can explain, but I am actually the executive director of Cornerstone Advocacy Services. I had the honor and privilege of serving on the task force to establish the Office for Murdered and Missing African American
Thank you for the correction.
Women. And, you know, a little bit about the Murdered and Missing African American Women Office and how this came about was that there were several women in Minnesota that were murdered, and the families were saying that they were having a hard time getting a response. When they first reported their loved one was missing, law enforcement would say things like, you know, they ran away. And they would come back and say, no, we know this person. We talk to each other several times a day. I don't know the last time we haven't talked to each other several times a day. We have not heard from them within 24 hours. Something is wrong. And so not listening to the families. And then the trials continued even beyond that, even when their loved one had been found murdered. So it comes out of that movement of families saying we need to do something better. And Ruth Richardson, who was a representative at that time, moved forward a bill around to establish a task force first to figure out what the issues, what the problems are, come up with recommendations. And one of those recommendations was establishing an office for missing and murdered African American women and girls. And this task force actually was facilitated by Dr. Brittany Lewis and Research in Action. And she did a marvelous job facilitating this. There was a legislative mandate of who needed to serve on the task force. And then alongside of that, Research in Action put together an advisory committee of folks with lived experience to walk alongside that task force to make sure that the task force was going in the right direction and they were appropriate with how they were doing their work. So that was an amazing process that we went through. And what the task force actually why it was created or what its charge was that we really needed to examine the systematic causes of violence against African American women and girls, appropriate methods of tracking and collecting data around that, policies, practices, and institutions that needed to be dismantled that were perpetrating violence against Black women and girls, and measures necessary to address and reduce violence against women and girls, and then vehicles to help their families and the community. So it was a large mandate, but this task force and the advisory committee under the leadership of their chairperson, who was Lakeisha Lee, and she's a young woman. Her sister, Brittany Clarity, was murdered at the age of 18, and their family had to do the investigation work to find her body. So it came out with 5 recommendations. One was establishing the Office for Murdered and Missing African American Women, create a fund for specific spaces and resources for girls and women, develop effective, culturally appropriate anti-racist trainings for professionals that women and girls encounter, hire and retain representation from Black community in these professions, and then implement better conditions across agencies to increase accessibility, access, responsiveness, and services.
So, Artika, we've got a short time left, and we've got about 7 minutes left. So, one of the things that I wanted to ask you before we roll off is, can you help us identify the resources that exist within the community to help address these issues? Now, you've talked about sexual assault, you've talked about domestic violence, you've talked about gender-based violence. Could you kind of segment out the different areas where you could direct people for support to deal with these different sets of issues?
So I can do one better.
Okay.
There is a day one hotline for the entire state of Minnesota that comes out of Cornerstone Advocacy Services. And the hotline number deals with domestic violence, sex trafficking, and sexual assault and violence. There is one number that you can call, and they will connect you with. When we talk about those multi-level response, of course, if you're in immediate danger, call 911. But if you're in crisis and you need support, you can get that from them. They can give you long-term support, and then also connect with shelter and housing as well. So the number is 1-866-223-111. You also can text 612-399-9995. And in addition, you can go to Cornerstone, MN, altogether.org, and you can do an online chat as well.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to repeat some of those numbers and websites.
I will definitely repeat it. Day one hotline, you can call them at 1-866-223-1111. You can text at 612-399-9995, or go to cornerstonemn.org. Altogether, cornerstonemn.org.
Okay, thanks so much. And Cooper is on the ball. So,
well, we've also got a slide show up, kind of some photographs. Dr. or Sister Artika, why don't you walk us through what we're looking at and sort of give us a tour?
Oh, sure. So I worked with Mincasa, and this was a press conference, I think, with Amy Klobuchar, and we were working on some legislation around safety for victims and survivors.
And next slide.
And then this was recent. This was Color of Change, looking at prosecutor roundtables and accountability. We were in Washington, D.C., and I'm there with, this is our Minnesota cohort. I'm there with Cynthia, the president of the NAACP. I have Justin Terrell, the executive director from the Minnesota Justice Research Center. The young man with his arm around Justin is Antonio Williams from Tone Up, and he is a community activist around criminal justice response. So we had a really good day of convening and working on prosecutor accountability.
Any more slides there? Okay, go ahead, keep going.
That is myself and Mr. Willie Roller my husband. We were in Washington, D.C. on the March of Washington, D.C. right after the George Floyd murder. And so we were out there showing our support for our Minneapolis cohort and seeking justice as well. This was not. This was just a few months ago with Senator Omar, and we were there.
Representative Omar. Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Representative Omar. I was reading the slide. Representative Omar, and working on some national legislation for murdered and missing African American women.
Okay.
Oh, and this is my wonderful cohort of awardees for the African American Heritage Calendar. You may be able to identify several community members in this picture. See, there is former Commissioner Harrington. Let's see,
Former
Representative.
Senator Jeff Hayden.
Yeah, Jeff Hayden's in the picture as well. And so that was an honor from, I think, 2020.
Yeah, nice pictures. And with one more document, you may have gone through these points, but once you pull that up, Cooper, the document, run through these one more time. These are important, and it's nice to see it in writing as well.
Yeah.
Share that again.
Yeah, so these were the recommendations that came out of the task force for murdered and missing African American women. And I want to note that Minnesota is the first state with an official office addressing these crimes against Black women. So establish the office. They are currently searching for a director for that office. So if anyone is interested, I hope the application process hasn't closed yet, but you can go to the Office of Justice Programs for that application. Create a fund specifically to create spaces and resources that serve Black women and girls. Develop effective, culturally appropriate anti-racist training for professionals that are working within our system. Hire more African American staff. In addition to hiring, making sure that we can retain our African American staff as well. Implement better coordination across systems to increase accessibility and services and responsiveness for families that have experienced loved ones that have been murdered, and then identify and implement better pathways to emergency and long-term housing.
So this is a new arena of activity. It's the proper work of public policy and lawmakers. What kind of funding went into creating this? Do you know, have any idea how much they launched this with, and what is it going to need to sustain its capacity to serve our people and our state in the years and decades ahead? What do you think?
Right, and I hope that I'm not misquoting, but I think it was $500 million over a period of time to address this need. And we need ongoing appropriation is my recommendation. So, and also
500 million, 500,000.
500. Oh, that's a good question.
Okay.
I don't want to misquote.
Okay.
And I'm leaning towards the 500,000. But I want to say that the second part of the question was how much do we need? And
Yes.
that is outlined in the recommendations. And we're asking for a significant amount of money in the recommendations and ongoing money. So I think that your 500,000 is correct. And we will need much more than that. I think we're asking for $1 billion for long-term sustainability.
Well, we'll do the research and find the number, but it's a good question. We have to, in all things, follow the money and know what the money is and know that money signifies weight or importance or priority. Let's, at the end of this, Dr. B, let me ask you to invite people to the recovery room and you can close the program. And Dr. Oliver, thank you so much. And thank you so much for being here and for the work that you're doing, Artika, in this important area. Dr. B, the talking stick I'm passing to you.
I'll take you back pretty quickly. I know we're running out of time. So I want to once again say thank you, Sister Artika, for gracing our show with your presence. You're truly a community treasure. And we all love you and the work you've always done. The Zoom ID right now is 860-6342-3024, and the passcode is 724195. We invite you, any people of the audience who want to join us right now, as we get to listen to each other talk further around this very important issue. And we ask you to join us in the recovery room, where we've been shocked by some of the things we've heard today, and now it's time to kind of own it and recover. So I'll see you in the next phase of our program today. Thank you again. And that concludes our healing circle for today. See you next time.